So team members, if you will stand and just give a wave of your hand. Team members, okay, thank you. Thank you. Chosen to spend this beautiful Saturday morning with us. And as I look around the room, I see old friends and some new friends. I see a lot of expertise around the tables. We are very fortunate that we have 5 community leaders who will be speaking to us this morning. But we want to acknowledge that there are lots of experts sitting around these tables. And a couple of times this morning, you'll have opportunities in the table conversation. So I hope that you glean from each other some of your experience and expertise. This is a quick quiz. How many of you have supported a food pantry? How many of you have given a little money to an emergency fund at your church or organization? All right. How many of you perhaps have prepared some food and served at the Franciscana House? Okay, way to go, way to go. Acts of charity, direct service are absolutely critical. We know that, so good for you. But this morning, we're focusing more on the structural and systemic causes of poverty in the Omaha area. So that's where we're going to be going today. Jim Wallace, a Christian evangelist and social activist, has noted that Jesus speaks more about economics in the New Testament, the haves and the have-nots, than any other subject short of idolatry. Jesus speaks more about economics than sex, than violence. He speaks more about economics than he does about worship. Those who were struggling with too little were a major concern to Jesus. And so, we today are gathered as the church and the broader community with that similar concern. Some of you have already noticed there's paper on the table. The tan-colored things, I'm going to ask you to kind of resist your curiosity until Rob Bly speaks. So, kind of put those away a little bit. On the table also are just a few copies of the flow of this morning. So if you kind of want to know what's coming next, there's only 3. We're trying not to kill a lot of trees. So there's 3 of these on each table. So if you want to know what's coming next, that's on there as well. The bio on the yellow sheet, there's 1 yellow sheet, and it's the extended bio of our 5 community leaders. So, kind of read that over, and if you'll pass that to your neighbor if you want an extended bio on our leaders. There are going to be no formal breaks, so do what you need to do. The coffee pot is on, tea, goodies. The restrooms, for those of you who don't know our building, there's restrooms just outside this door and to your left. And there's also 2 smaller restrooms on this side, out down the hall and to your right. So no formal breaks. We're packing a lot in this morning. So just do what you need to do. Both of our pastors are here this morning. I'd like to acknowledge Jane Florence. Jane. And Deborah McKnight is here after recent tonsillectomy surgery, so bless her heart. And Deborah's going to come and just center us in a word of prayer before we go further.
I invite you to find a posture that feels comfortable for prayer, meditation, or reflection. Gracious and loving God, we give thanks for your presence in words and wisdom, in experience and learning. We give thanks for your presence in the faces of people all around us and beyond our doors. We pray for this time of unpacking and unraveling systems that are complex and opposed to change. We pray for this time that we might be a people of courage, compassion, and grace. We pray these things in the name of the one that is, was, and always will be. Amen.
We're beginning with a panel of 3 community leaders, and I'm going to introduce all 3 of them, if you'll hold your applause until the third one is introduced, and in the order that they will be speaking with us this morning. Carolina Quezada is the Executive Director of the Latino Center of the Midlands. She has a wide array of experiences in organizational management, with emphasis on educational and neighborhood services. Her values were shaped by her background, and hard work has brought her into arenas for better futures for the people she serves. We welcome you, Carolina. Aubrey Mancuso is from Voices for Children in Nebraska. She's a graduate of Creighton University and returned to Omaha to serve as policy coordinator for economic stability and health at Voices for Children. In addition to this part of her career, she has worked with chronically homeless adults with mental illness and the food stamp program. We welcome you, Aubrey. And Ben Gray is here this morning. He was elected to the Omaha City Council in 2009. His presence is also well known to many of us through the medium of television, having served as producer of Kaleidoscope on ABC's affiliate KETV. We welcome you, Ben. Welcome. And with that, I will give it over to you, Carolina.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Boy, I was just sharing with a friend that I'm pleasantly surprised that I'm quite alert on a Saturday morning. Typically by Fridays, I am completely spent, as I'm sure you all are as well. And I just have to say, Carol, I'm so glad that everyone here is very conscious about conservation, because I had a little snafu with my printer today, and there are many trees lying around my house this morning. Well, good morning, everyone. It's really my pleasure to be here with all of you today and really share what's our experience and our perspective around the topic and the issue of health in our community. And as I was putting together the remarks for today's presentation, I thought, primarily what we do as Latino Center of the Midlands is we focus on education and educational attainment in our community. What's the connection to health? Well, I hope I'm able to make a good case today for that. Latino Center of the Midlands, we've been around for just over 43 years. And since the inception of our organization, which started as the Chicano Awareness Center, we've always been focused on education and the educational attainment in our community, and that's always been a very huge point of consideration and of concern, and a big area of advocacy for the organization. Today we operate 3 core areas of programming. We have a community services and technical assistance program. In that program, we really focus on everything that comes to our doors, and that can be just about anything. We're a very popular storefront in South Omaha, in the heart of South Omaha, right on 24th Street. So we have a lot of requests for all sorts of assistance, from connecting to legal services, connecting to counseling on immigration, food pantry, all sorts of issues. So our program and our staff in that program really have to respond and have to be very adaptive to just about anything that comes through our doors. Last year we served over 1,900 individuals in that program alone. Our second program focuses on adult basic education. We realize that that's such a critical and huge need in our community. We are primarily serving Spanish-speaking adult immigrants, and most of the adults that we're serving are in their late 20s all the way through early 60s. We have been seeing a trend in the last few years that our adult learners are getting a little older. It's kind of interesting because we're seeing it on both spectrums of the age range. We're getting younger folks coming through our doors, dreamers, and we're also getting older individuals, folks who still have to make sure that they're able to contribute somehow to the workforce. And I think through that program, we really get to see a different lens of what poverty looks like and how it affects such a wide range of ages. Last year, we served over 630 individuals in our program. And our other program, and I think I just skipped ahead, it really focuses on educational support for young people in our community. We're currently at Bryan High School, South High School. This year we just started serving Bellevue West High School. The Latino community there is increasing rather quickly, and so we focus on truancy prevention, which is still a big issue in our community, and it's something that we're very much concerned about. Last year we served over 200 in that program. This is, I just want to give you a quick snapshot of Latinos in the country today. We are approximately 17% of the national population. Most of the Latinos in this demographic are actually native born. And I think it's really important to focus on those numbers because oftentimes what we see in the news doesn't quite reflect who most of the Latino population really is. We're multi-generational. We represent a variety of socioeconomic and educational backgrounds as well. And Latinos, for the most part, are a very young population. The latest numbers have us, our median age is approximately 27. And some demographic models are also projecting that by the year 2050, 2 out of every 5 children in the nation will be Latino. Just some other quick facts nationally, just to put certain things into context. The Latino poverty rate is higher than the U.S. poverty rate. And although, for the most part, our community has reached record numbers as far as college enrollment, but our levels of educational attainment are still at the very lowest among different ethnic groups in our community and in the nation. Locally, just to give you a quick snapshot of where we are in the region, and as I say region, we're primarily looking at the metro area, which is Douglas County, Sarpy County, and Potawatomi County. There are close to 71,000 Latinos living in this area. What that means for the region is we're getting much closer to the 10% number. In the city of Omaha proper, Latinos are approximately 11 to 12% of the total population. And I also thought I would share with you some figures that we always pull in reference to education. We know that education is the biggest change maker in our community. Access to education. Are we also fulfilling higher levels of education? And that really completely creates or changes the opportunities for individuals to really mobilize in their community, have access to resources, jobs, etc. Now I'd like to get to the point on what is this connection between the overall health of communities and community engagement. And I went in and I did a little bit of research just to see what other larger systems are, how they're connecting engaging community to health outcomes in our communities. And I'll tell you that from our vantage point, and where we feel that we can help inform this conversation on health, it's really through looking at community engagement. What does it look like? Are we really seeing our community engaged at all different levels, and what does engagement mean? And I'll have to tell you something, that this conversation has become so real in the last several months, as Latino Center in the Midlands has been one of the many organizations really promoting the school bond and passing the school bond. And I think we did fabulously well, as the latest numbers are showing. But one of the biggest lessons really for us, even though we've been in the community for many years, we're a grassroots organization, we operate grassroots-based programming, but it was a level of engagement that we saw as we were going into the community, as we were talking about how schools are financed and why it's important to look at public financing and making the connection to quality education in our neighborhoods. And as soon as we were able to convene parents, we realized that this is an issue that's very important to them. Many of the parents in our community may not have such a deep understanding as to the connection between public financing systems and, at the end of the day, how that directly correlates to the quality of education that their kids are getting. But once we opened up those avenues of communication and creating a venue and an opportunity to have these conversations, it just completely exploded. I want to share with you a couple of things that I found as I was looking at how larger systems are conceptualizing community engagement. And I found these three. The first is that community engagement really means encompassing a wide variety of activities, from information sharing to community empowerment. And what that means is it really goes beyond just convening in a forum. It goes much beyond that. It really looks at how are we truly engaging community members in not only defining the issues, but also defining the solutions. It's also seen as a core approach to improving population health, and is a means of helping citizens understand the issues confronting their community and possible solutions. And I think that this is where a lot of us who do community work, whether we work for a nonprofit organization, we're a board member at a nonprofit organization, we're active in our church, this is where the rubber really meets the road. What is engagement really looking like? And are these communities that are primarily affected and we know that are disproportionately impacted by poverty, are they engaged? Are they engaged in evaluating systems? Are they engaged in also being at the table and talking about what the possible solutions are as well? So again, I just want to revisit what some of the challenges have been with us is, how do we create more venues to involve communities in the analysis of their issues? So again, it's not looking at individuals who live in South Omaha, for example, as targets for programming, but as change agents in their own community. And that's where I think we really have to start looking at how we're changing that paradigm. How are we changing those conversations for that? It's really critical that we have all communities participate and lead initiatives for change. And really, what I pose before you, and this is in large part a conversation we're having at the Latino Center in the Midlands, is how do we make change sustainable? If Latino Center Midlands closes tomorrow and we're no longer offering basic adult education, if we're no longer doing something about addressing the issue of truancy in our communities, working hand in hand with the public school system, what happens? So it's really important that as we look at how we conceptualize issues around, foundational issues around poverty, and how that affects and defines situations for communities, that we're at the same time looking at how our community members who are affected by these policies, by these practices, by these services, are they at the table also providing solutions as well? So, I think that what we really have to do is ask ourselves, what is my sphere of influence? How can I then help promote and increase levels of engagement throughout all communities? And this is a great thing, I think, about engaging with a group such as this, that you're very well connected, you're leaders in your communities, something that Carol said earlier to introduce these subjects today, is that in fact we are leaders in our communities, and within our own spheres, within our own knowledge base, and our own circles, our social circles, there's a lot that we can do to really move along and push forward this issue about this paradigm change. That folks in all sorts of communities, whether they are primarily Latino communities, or African American communities, or refugee or immigrant communities, the face of poverty doesn't have a race, it doesn't have an age, it doesn't have a name or surname, it affects all of us. And that's even in rural communities, I think we see that quite a bit. So it's really about, if as we look at solutions, as we look at how we frame the issue, or the issues, the foundational issues affecting poverty, it's also, again, looking at what can I do to really help include the individuals who are affected by these policies, practices, programs, also be at the table to help define their course as well. So I put before you the following as we wrap up my comments. As community members, it's really our responsibility to, again, help all communities promote the analysis of issues affecting our daily lives. All community members must be empowered to be strong change agents. And one of the most critical ways that we do that, and the ways that we can make that sustainable, is to continue to promote civic engagement and leadership in all of its forms. And that's one of the issues that we face every day. Even though we know that most of our programming, most of the outcomes, the indicators, all the data that we're tracking as an organization all points to education, but at the end of the day, if we're not doing our job to really engage our own adult learners and the youth that we're serving in really conceptualizing and connecting and helping them connect the dots between education and changing communities and changing situations for themselves, for their neighbors, for their kids, for their parents, then we're not really doing our job. We're not really doing this sustainably. So I hope that some of the points that I share today it will help to further inform the way that we really look at engagement. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. And I thought I would share just a couple of the resources that I use when I look at data and look at piecing different pieces of the puzzle together. And I hope there's time for questions and some dialogue. I would love to be a part of that. Thank you for your time.
I'm Mancuso. I'm with Voices for Children in Nebraska, and for those of you not familiar with Voices for Children, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan child and research and advocacy organization, and our mission is to build opportunities for all children in our community with research, advocacy, and community engagement. If you have heard of Voices for Children, you may have heard of our annual Kids Count Nebraska report. It's the Can you hear me? It's the largest, most comprehensive research on child well-being in Nebraska, and it tracks how Nebraska kids are doing from a data perspective on over 200 indicators related to health, education, safety, and economic well-being. And when we say safety, we're generally talking about child welfare and juvenile justice system. And those are just some stats from our last year's report, our 2013 report, and our 2014 report will be coming out in January, so these will be updated. And really that data that we collect in our Kids Count report is really the basis of everything we do. We can't know where we need to go unless we understand where we are, right? So from using that data, we're really able to look at how are Nebraska kids doing? Who are the Nebraska kids who aren't doing as well as others? Where do other states do a lot better on child well-being, and what are those states doing that we aren't? So we're able to ask those questions sort of based on that data. When we talk about poverty, I think it's always important to kind of define what people are generally talking about. And this is the federal poverty line in 2014. And you can see for one person, it would be just under $12,000 a year. And for family of four, so 2 adults and 2 kids, it would be just under $24,000. The official poverty line was developed in the 1960s, and it was based just on the cost of food. And at that time, food constituted about a third of the family's budget. So we took that number, we multiplied it by 3, and we updated it every year. So what the poverty line is useful for is tracking changes over time, and it's our benchmark for eligibility for all our public programs. What it doesn't tell us is anything about what families actually need to make ends meet, and how families in our community are really faring economically. That being said, these are our official poverty rates in Nebraska for kids. And you can see we've had a pretty significant jump in poverty since the year 2000. We were down at about 10% of kids in poverty in 2000. This is the entire state. And now we're at about 17.7% of kids. And the other really significant thing I think you'll see here is that we have ongoing significant disparities in our poverty rates based on race and ethnicity. And those trends have continued to be exacerbated over time. This past year, we actually saw poverty tick down just a little bit, but it ticked down for white kids and it ticked up for children of color. And those are the types of trends that we look at and see as being really troubling. These are our Omaha poverty rates, and you'll notice that our overall child poverty rate in Omaha is a little bit higher than the rest of the state at 19.1%. And again, you'll continue to see the disparities in our poverty rates here. When we talk about the racial disparities in poverty rates, I always like to give that a little bit of context, and I think Carol's opening set that up well. When we talk about our systems and structures and how they can perpetuate inequities, including poverty. But sometimes when someone says that sentence, it's really hard to understand what that means, and so I always like to give an example. And there's a great video I'm just going to show you 2 seconds of that I think explains it a lot more clearly behind it. Hopefully this works.
There was a time when hundreds of thousands of GIs came home ready to start families, but hadn't a place to live.
In the 1930s, the federal government created the Federal Housing Administration, whose job it was to provide loans or the backing for loans to average Americans getting to purchase a home.
Federal programs and banks sank millions into the home construction industry. Their message to veterans: you can afford a new home. Buy a new home now. Tax dollars helped make the single-family home a mass-produced consumer item. The American dream had a new name: suburbia.
We came to a little town and we found the model house, and we walked in and we looked around, and of course in the eyes of a young man who was raised in the ghetto, so to speak, it was an interesting experience, interesting lifestyle, seeing all the new modern conveniences, very fascinating.
Eugene Burnett came home with almost 1 million other black GIs. They had fought for the country in segregated ranks. They returned hoping for equality and the American dream. For many, that dream was a new home for little money down and some of the easiest credit terms in history.
I went up to the salesman: we're interested in your home, we're interested in buying one, and what is the procedure? Is there an application to be filled out? So forth. So he looked at me, looked around, and he said to me, he says, listen, it's not me, but the owners of this development have not as yet decided to sell these homes to Negroes.
The FHA underwriters warned that the presence of even 1 or 2 non-white families could undermine real estate values in the new suburbs. These government guidelines were widely adopted by private industry. Race had long played a role in local real estate practices. Starting in the 1930s, government officials institutionalized the national appraisal system, where race was as much a factor in real estate assessment as the condition of the property. Using this scheme, federal investigators evaluated 239 cities across the country for financial risk.
So that those
So if you have time to watch that whole video, it's a PBS series called Race, the House We Live In, and it's a really great series, but I think it really explains how for a long time in this country we had federal policies that dictated access to the housing market based on race, and a lot of those things had generational consequences, right? So did the parents have a home that they could borrow against to send their kids to college? Did they then have an asset to pass on to that next generation? And some of our policies from, that were in place until about the 1960s really are still having a strong impact on the disparities we see in poverty rates today. And, even the relationship between education financing and property values, when we look at the racialized history of housing policy in this country, continues to create additional challenges in that sphere. This slide is not going to be a huge surprise, but poverty is really bad for kids. So it's associated with a variety of negative outcomes, lack of adequate nutrition, lack of access to affordable health care, lack of quality early educational experiences, and a variety of challenges that higher income peers generally don't have. I think the other thing that's important about those risk factors is that they often have consequences that last into adulthood. Kids who come into contact with the juvenile justice system are more likely to become involved with the adult criminal justice system. Kids who lack access to early health care, early nutrition, some of those things have health consequences that carry over into adulthood. And certainly the educational experiences, there's sort of a cumulative effect of them over a lifetime that can lead to lower graduation rates and ultimately less likelihood of accessing higher education. I think the other interesting thing in Nebraska is that our poverty rates persist in spite of our strong employment statistics. So we often hear that the solution to poverty is employment. And I think that employment is certainly a piece, but we have to define what we're talking about. We need to be accessing high quality employment, and that means employment that includes benefits and employment that really pays a living wage. In Nebraska, we have a higher percentage, I think we're 8th in the nation of the number of workers holding multiple jobs. We have 8.6 Nebraska workers are holding multiple jobs, and nationally it's only 4.9%. And only 2% of Nebraska kids are living in a home where there's no working adults. So the working adult may or may not be a parent, but it could be a grandparent or another adult, but we still have almost 20% of our kids living in poverty, and only 2% of those kids are not living with a working adult. In part because of the challenges I mentioned with the poverty line, and there's a tool on our website, we tried to look at a different definition of economic security. We call it the family bottom line. And it accounts for regional variations in the cost of living, and it also looks at variances in cost based on the age of the children, and it really tries to determine what does a Nebraska family living in a certain county with a certain number of children of varying ages need to make ends meet without assistance. And this is the family bottom line for, this is an aggregate of our metropolitan regions, but it's pretty close to what Douglas County would be, and it shows the minimum cost of what a family, in this case a single parent family and a two-parent family with 2 kids would really need to get by. And when we looked back at the poverty line for family of 4, it was just under $24,000. For that same family, under this measure of economic security, it would be almost $50,000 a year. When you take into account housing, child care, transportation, and the net effect of taxes. And I should mention there's a tool on our website if you want to look at it where you can actually input a county and family type and look at that more closely. I'm going to try and speed up because my time is running out, but the other interesting thing is we look at where families are spending their money, and for families with young kids, child care is the largest cost in the family budget, followed by housing and then food. And remember that our poverty line is actually based on the cost of food, which is not the most significant expense for families today. I always like to show this slide when we're talking about poverty because I think poverty often feels like a giant unsolvable problem. It feels that way to me some days too, but this slide always helps me put things in perspective because when you look at what's happened with our poverty rates in this country among the elderly compared to what's happened in kids, if we look back to the 1960s, the elderly poverty rate was almost around 30 to 35%. And kids were just below that, at around 25 to 30%. And then when you look at our poverty rates today, the elderly poverty rate is actually the lowest line over here. It's at 9.1%, and kids nationally are at 21.8%. And does anybody have any thoughts on what are some of the things that have helped mitigate that poverty rate among the elderly?
Social Security and Medicare.
Exactly, Social Security and Medicare. So, we made a decision to make some of those collective investments, and they really made a difference. And we could do the same for our kids. So I'm going to talk very quickly about some of the policy solutions. I think one of the things I mentioned was quality early childhood systems and programs. So looking at our child care systems, in Nebraska, almost 75% of our kids have all available parents in the workforce, that's kids under 6. So we know our kids are being cared for by someone else. So where are they being cared for, and what is the quality of the settings they're in? So addressing eligibility for child care assistance to make it affordable for families, and also ensuring that child care assistance is providing quality programming. I'm going to skip this because I know James is going to talk about it. And then tax credits for working families. The Earned Income Tax Credit is widely considered one of the most effective anti-poverty programs we have in this country. And in 2012, it lifted about 6.5 million people, including 3.3 million children above the poverty line. So it's a tax credit that we could increase that really helps working families. And then the final thing I'm going to mention just quickly is access to higher education. So right now when we do interventions aimed at making higher education affordable and accessible, we really are looking at the farther end of the spectrum, right? So when a kid gets close to college, we say, where are you going to college? And maybe we have a scholarship or some financial assistance to offer. But what we're really finding is that the impact of the educational experience that a child has are really cumulative. And really, if you don't find ways to get college-based interventions to young kids, you're really making it much more challenging to have those interventions later on. And one of the really innovative things that a lot of states and cities are doing is child savings accounts for education. So if you're a lucky kid born in San Francisco, you get a $50 educational savings account when you enter kindergarten. And then there's incentives where private foundations add to that for things like perfect attendance. In Nevada, every kid in the state is getting one of those, as well as in Maine. So that's one of the interesting educational interventions. And then I'm just going to wrap up quickly with how to get involved. Connect with organizations who are reading all those bills and those policies and sending out information about it, like ours. Use your voice with policymakers, write op-eds, letters to the editor, come to public events, rallies, and press conferences to show your support. And with that, I'm going to stop talking.
Good morning.
Hope my voice will hold up this morning a little bit. I'm one of the older guys here, and so I don't have a slide presentation. I'm a little bit more technically challenged. So, in a lot of ways, I like to keep it simple, but more importantly, I think what I want to do is kind of feed off of some of the things that they said. But I'm going to address it from a different perspective. I spent 35 years as a television journalist, and I'm going into my 6th year on the Omaha City Council. And in those environments, I've had an opportunity to look and see things that, first of all, I think there's a young man that used to do a television show, and he would watch things and it make you go, when he was talking, because there are things that have occurred in this country and occurred in this city that we need to at least understand before we can address some of the issues of poverty and so forth that continue to exist. In 1980, in Washington, D.C., there were about 3,400 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. in 1980. Today, there are nearly 38,000 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. 38,000. And what they have been doing, what has been going on over the course of time, is that laws have been changed to benefit those with wealth. And when those laws were changed to benefit those with wealth, guess who got left out?
Yeah.
And we can talk about the minority population, but in my district, for example, I have to address poverty. I have the largest number of young people in poverty in this country per capita. largest number per capita in this country live in my district, people of color. We have the 8th poorest community in the country in my district. And it didn't all happen by accident. In a lot of instances, all of us in this room got tricked. We were led to believe certain things because politicians and others, me being one of them, politicians know how to package something up, make it look good to you, but at the end of the day, what they package for you, actually, they can't do. And they can't do it because, and I look at the people that ran for Congress and ran for the U.S. Senate this time, and when they get to Washington, D.C., they're not going to be facing a lot of the things that early on people used to face. They're going to be facing a lot of lobbyists that are going to throw money at them, and they're going to want them to do certain things for them. And when they do those certain things, they're going to leave other people out. Nearly 38,000 lobbyists. And the dollars, when we had the largest economic downturn since the Great Depression, how many people went to jail? How many people went to jail? You got the number right. She said 0. Nobody went to jail. Even though they engaged in policies that if those policies had stayed in existence a little more than 20 years ago, we'd have had to build another jail for all the criminals that made money off of those who are now in poverty. We've got a new group of people in poverty, and they're all colors, and they're all ages, and they're there because we got tricked. We got tricked into thinking several things. First of all, we got tricked into thinking that government somehow was too big. And people continue to tell you that government is too big. I first got on the city council and a lady called me. I'd been on the city council 1 month. And a lady called me and asked me, there were 7 trees on this street called Paxton Boulevard in North Omaha that had the X on it. Those trees were bad and needed to come down. And they had been sitting there for like about 3.5 years. And she asked me, when was the forestry department going to get to those trees? And I said, well, I don't know, but I know they're part of the parks department, so let me find out for you. I'm a new guy on the city council. I said, let me find out for you when they're going to be able to get to it. And I called the parks department and I said, lady called me, wanted to know when they were going to get to the trees, those 7 trees on Paxton Boulevard. And they wanted to know when the forestry department was going to get to them. The city of Omaha didn't have a forestry department. A city of 400,000 plus people, and we had no forestry department. We had lost a number of mechanics, so our infrastructure, our trucks, our plows, all of those were old, and many of them were 12 and 13 and 14 years old. And the other side of that is we didn't have people to operate them. Over the course of the last 15 years, the city of Omaha, just in their civilian population alone, has lost over 400 employees. 400. And they did this all across the country. So I want you to look at poverty from a little bit different perspective. We helped to create it with the policies that we put in place. And in addition to that, we created laws that when a young person smokes a marijuana cigarette, he's almost doomed for life at that point. Because our policies created it. The policies that we put in place, the laws that we passed. We made crack cocaine. Now, crack cocaine is a derivative of cocaine. And let me tell you the insanity that existed in this country for a period of time. An individual can have 500 pounds of cocaine and get probation. A black kid can have 5 rocks of crack cocaine and he gets 10 years. The derivative is cocaine that makes the crack cocaine. But those who have the quantity get less time in prison. Those who make the crack cocaine, and I'm not saying crack cocaine is a good thing or that cocaine is a good thing. I'm just telling you the disparities that continue to exist in this country and in this city and in this state. When we look at what has occurred in this country, and we have been led to believe that government is too big and our infrastructure is crumbling. When was the last time you saw so many water breaks, or streets cave in, or bridges close? All across this country and even in this city. I covered a bridge over on 16th, over on Locust Street, where you go between Omaha and Carter Lake. And that bridge collapsed, and 5 cars were caught in that bridge collapse while I was a journalist. We started to see the destruction and the deterioration of our streets and our neighborhoods then. In North Omaha, we've got streets that have not been touched in over 20 years. Over 20 years. And so when we talk about the issues of poverty and how we got here, a lot of it is a result of policies that were created that some of us didn't even know about. And in other instances, we were tricked. We were led to believe that government somehow was too big. When the accident happened over here just off of 72nd Street, see what the policy that exists now is that it's easier and less expensive to create structures that are not structurally sound, and if they cave in and loss of life occurs, it has been determined economically that it's better for those conditions to exist, and if something happens, it's less expensive to pay the claim than it is to prepare and make the building sound and proper. That's what we've created in this community, all across this country. And we've been led to believe again that government is too big. Government employed a number of our folks. And a number of our people were keeping our streets safe. We had enough police officers. We're 130 police officers down today for the size of the city that we have. We don't have a number of people. You know what? We have one person in city government. One in city government. And if that person goes down, the rest of us in city government are in bad trouble. Because we got one person that knows how to run payroll for all of the employees in this city. How silly is that? How unconscionably stupid is that? And we continue to allow these kinds of things to happen largely because we don't know about it and people don't talk about it enough. We need to put people back to work. And some of the jobs that currently are available are jobs that a lot of the people who lost their jobs can't do. So they have to be retrained. There has to be retraining programs like Hartman Workforce Solutions and others. And that training has to be specific in a lot of instances through Metro Community College and other places to get people up to speed rather quickly so that they can get back on the right track and start taking care of their families. But a lot of the environment that exists today exists because laws were passed that we were unaware of. Lobbyists were taking their toll in Washington, D.C. They have to be effective. There are people in this community and in this nation with so much money, I don't even think they know how much money they have. And they lead, and as a result of the policy shift that occurred over the last 30 years in this country, it led to the conditions that currently exist. How do we get out of it? A couple of things we need to recognize. First of all, we need to be conscious of what's going on in government at every level. And we need to find out what the real truth is at every level. The other thing we need to do is be more proactive in terms of joining the Latino Center of the Midlands, the Empowerment Network. I don't think you have to be a Latino to join. You certainly don't have to be black to join the Empowerment Network. You know, we have a 360 violence prevention organization that meets every Wednesday at Omaha Home for Boys. There are others that we need to be supporting. I'm sitting here looking at John Jeanette, and I know Heartland Family Services is doing all that they can to turn the poverty rates around for young people. There are a lot of organizations that are doing really good work, but they're fighting for dollars from the philanthropic community and other places when the city and the state ought to be more involved. Let me leave you with one more thing. We've been having this argument about the good time law. The vast majority of people who get the good time when they leave prison, you all never hear about it. Never. And that's almost 90%. And you never hear about it because they find a way to get back to work and get back to taking care of their families and get back to doing what they do. You never hear about those folks. You will hear about Nico Jenkins and say the good time law has to be rescinded. Well, let me tell you all something. If we rescind the good time law, then you all need to sit and tell me how many prisons you want to build. Because that's what's going to be next. We have to be politically smart. We have to be politically savvy. We have to be involved in knowing what's going on. We have to join organizations that are at the forefront of getting at this, like Voices for Children and the Latino Center and the Empowerment Network and other organizations that really are down on the ground, Heartland Family Services, a number of other groups that know what to do and know how to get it done, and we support them as much as we can. But at the same time, the one thing we have to do more than anything else is be engaged in the political process so that we can start to change some of this foolishness and start telling the truth about what government really is and isn't, what can and cannot occur. We have homelessness that is out of control. I've been dealing with people this week trying to address that. The Sienna Francis House slept 128 men on the floor in addition to the 348 beds that they had. And when that sewer separation project starts, they're going to spread that out. They're not going to be able to go there that much, and so they're going to be spread out into these communities, and the end result is going to be chaos if we don't fix it. Thank you all.
Thank you to all three of you. And now we have a few minutes for questions and answers. We have a couple of our team with cordless mics, so if you want to raise your hand, they'll find you. Please resist long speeches, but we want some good questions.
Mr. Green, you talked about engagement, political engagement, and we know from reports, for example, in Ferguson, Missouri, which has a large minority population, 8% of the people voted, while they make up 70% of the population. As I understand, the last election in North Omaha, approximately 8% voted. What can we do to help encourage people to get engaged politically by voting and by taking the chance and the move that will represent themselves better?
We've been, a lot of our community has been convinced that their vote doesn't count because they don't understand the political process. That's what I try to tell people in my district all the time, is that, you know, when I was campaigning for office, I would go to people's doors and I would knock on the door, and most people like me, I think, some don't, and that's okay with me because it's politics and television and all of that I was in, and sometimes when you come to the door, you're the last person that they want to see. But I tell people when I go, I said, look, I would love for you all to vote for me, but if you don't like what I've done, then don't vote for me, but vote. Because when you send significant numbers when you vote in significant numbers, politicians have to pay attention. But we're convinced that the vote does not, a lot of our community is convinced that their vote doesn't count. And again, they don't know what to do because, again, we're not informed as a voting society. And that goes beyond just my district. We just don't know because, again, we've been sold a bill of goods, and we have, and how we get those numbers up is by continuing to focus on telling people, having town hall meetings and other meetings of that sort, and getting on the social media, which my wife and other people do better than I do, so they send my messages out for me. But, you know, to get the word out that why voting is important and why you need to get to the polls and vote. We've been in a sleep mode in thinking what we need to do, in thinking that somehow things are not going to change and my vote doesn't count. We've got to create that hope, first of all, that awareness, secondly, and that understanding of how politics works, third. And that's going to be a big task, but we got to take it on, because that's the answer.
Another question?
I think this might be more of a comment, but I just can't agree with you more. And I work at the Renaissance Clinic at the Salvation Army, and this week has been Christmas sign up where you can sign up for assistance for food for Christmas and toys for kids and things like that. And every day the line is just around the building. And when I was leaving to go vote the other day, I just thought, if I could just take this line and go take people to vote, the world would change. And it's that exact thing, is they look at the demographics of who's voted, and they want to make those people happy. And so I've been trying to explain this to my patients, and it's the hopelessness. They just really feel like no one's listening. And so I really urge you that to empower people in my sphere, that I'm going to get my patients voting next time. It could really change things. So I really appreciate what you say about community engagement. It's huge.
If I may just add a little something around that, because, you know, we're just wrapping up an election season here, getting ready for another one. 2016 is around the corner. Never ends. But I just, you know, want to acknowledge, too, there are a lot of extremely passionate people in Omaha, and people who know how to organize communities, and they know how to organize our community, and we have heard and we know that there have been a lot of pretty massive voter registration drives, but to Councilman Gray's point, it's really hard to mobilize communities when they don't see the day-to-day effect of getting out and voting. I think a lot of what happens, so I think it's a cultural thing that happens in the United States, regardless of what generation you're in. If you have family members who've been here for 5 generations, 1 generation, and you're the first generation. But I think the other thing that we're seeing in communities that are largely immigrant communities are a couple of things. The first is we have a lot of individuals who want to make a difference, who want to exercise their civic voice, but they're not able to yet. And that's a policy issue, that is a situation with their status. What we consistently tell them, and again, thank you for bringing up spheres of influence, because I think in everything that we do here, we have to consistently send the message out. There may be a reason why you can't vote, but you're a leader in your community, and you have your sphere of influence, and you know folks who can vote, and you have to encourage them to vote because they represent you at the polls as well. So that's something that we've been very, very pushy about too, is getting that message out, making sure that, you know, even if civic engagement doesn't mean literally walking into the poll booth for that particular person or family, but they can exert that influence in other ways. I think what we're also seeing culturally as a barrier to civic engagement is, in particular with immigrant and refugee families, they're bringing a lot of cultural baggage with them as to how political systems work in their native countries. And that's something to be very aware of, is that, you know, part of this education in civics, in U.S. citizenship, in getting involved in your community at all levels of government, also involves having to change some of your own paradigms about what you are bringing with you and some of that baggage. And I think we've been seeing a lot of, you've been tracking some of the news that's coming out of Mexico and Central America. It's horrible what's happening civically and politically in those countries. And that affects the mindset of folks who are coming to this country. And there's a big trust issue. And I think that that's something that we have to keep in mind as we work with communities who are trying to integrate, who are trying to engage in new systems, social systems, but also in political systems.
Another question?
I have a question for Aubrey. I'm especially interested in the family bottom line. I would appreciate getting more statistics on that, and I'm assuming that those are available on your website and through your kids count. But it seems to me that that would be one of the most important things that I could do in my parish, is help people understand that even though people are above the federal poverty line, this is what it really takes. And I would love to have some resources and some fact sheets and that kind of thing to begin to educate people in my parish about the family bottom line.
Yeah, and if you go to, I think it's familybottomline, either .com or .org. It's connected to our website at voicesforchildren.com, but you can actually enter in individual information and get output.
.org.
I think .com, but if you go to voicesforchildren.com, you can find it from there. That's probably easier.
And you talked about the increase of lobbyists. You didn't say anything about where the money is coming to pay for those 38,000 lobbyists.
Yeah, you're right. But it's really not hard. It comes from the corporations themselves, because they are willing to spend thousands of dollars on lobbyists to make millions and billions of dollars later on. They're willing to spend that money because as you change those laws, like I said earlier, we had the largest economic disaster since the Great Depression, and not a single person went to jail because they were able to change the laws and make it so that things that were illegal 20 years ago are legal today for banks and others to do. And I'm not blaming banks or anything like that. You know, they took advantage of an opportunity. The other thing I want to say, though, I want to go back to one other question. The fact of the matter is that, you know, there are some people in my district that we don't get along, and part of the reason we don't get along is because I tell everybody in my community, every time I get a chance to talk to them, that they have to step up their game. I don't care what color you are. I don't care what your background is. You got to step up your game. Because we're currently living in a society where if you don't, you're going to get swallowed under. And so you got to step your game up. You've got to be able to find employment. We've created mechanisms for you to be retrained through HeartNet Workforce Solutions and other things. You got to take advantage of those while they exist. You got to step your game up. But in Washington, to ask you, and, you know, to go back to your question again, the corporations pay for it themselves. Oh, and by the way, the United States Supreme Court just declared a little while ago that a corporation is a person. You know, now, I have no law degree, no background in the law. I don't understand precedent sometimes. But I do find it extremely difficult to determine how a corporation can be a person. And then that person can spend thousands of dollars at the end of the day to create millions and billions of dollars for their company later on. That's who spends the money.
For Aubrey, you indicated that we're seeing a large number of children in poverty getting higher education. How do student loans impact their ability to get out of poverty?
Yeah, I think when I was talking about that last slide on higher education, I talked about it sort of quickly, but I think when we look at things like student loans or even scholarships, the intervention that for the goal you're trying to meet is coming way too late. So, and I think the whole student loan issue is a whole other thing. I think, not just lower income kids, but sort of middle income kids who are taking on huge loans and then graduating and aren't being able to afford homes or delaying marriage, and those things all have consequences too. But I think, one of the things we need to do is really look at what's happening to those kids as young kids, and how do we really impact their aspirations for college at a younger age, rather than just looking at those interventions that make it affordable at that moment when they're at the right age to go to college. I don't know if that really answered your question, but yeah, I think the student loan question is a whole other complicated system that's creating its own challenges.
We got time for one more question.
Hi, I am a teacher at Complex. I live here in Omaha, and I have a lot of kids that come in from Harder, like I teach at TJ. And so I'm familiar with the impact of poverty and the education and truancy and kids having jobs and then failing classes because they have to go to work to support their family. And it just seems like this huge, overwhelming, what can I do to help them besides be there for them emotionally and engage in things politically? But do you have any suggestions for even just one-on-one what I could do with my kids or what I can do to help more?
I'd like to take the first stab at that. And it sounds like in many ways you're doing the right thing, given what you can do. I know that instruction and support in the classroom and within the school building and the school system can go only so far. Once kids leave that building, they're faced with day-to-day reality, and so are their parents. But, one of the things we find in the work that we do, that it's really important not to look at the child as a standalone unit per se, or target. It's really looking at the child or the youth within the context of the family. Whether they're living with parents or they're living with other relatives or in other situations. And we really try to keep that in mind as we engage the youth. In the programming that we do, we find that kids may not say this, but they really do care about what's happening with mom and dad. And that's oftentimes what's pushing them out the door to get a job. So we really try to find ways to find that individual space to engage with parents as well as parents, and parents as individuals. And we're finding that one of the biggest opportunities with the families that we convene is to strike some kind of partnership with teachers, because teachers are very well respected in our community, and I'll just speak, from the perspective of the community we serve. And if there's a stronger way to forge a real relationship there, for example, if they can trust you, if you're someone who is resourceful, if kind of providing some additional information that parents may need, that also goes a long way in impacting, I think, that perspective of that young person with how school really does care about who they are and what they're doing. So from that vantage point of how, that relationship could also be forged with parents, and providing those resources that they may often not say that they need, but they really do.
Let me give a 30-second answer, because I know it's about. In Omaha, Miller Park Elementary School was a failing school before a white teacher, Lisa Rottenbach, took over that school. What she began to do, and what she had her teachers begin to do, was every time you get a new class, you get those names, you get the address, you get the names and addresses, phone numbers of the families, and you call them. And you call them about something, and you call them and say, I'm Mrs. So-and-so, and I'm your child's teacher, and I'd like to make sure that we work with partnerships so that when far too often when people come to the classroom, they're already ticked off at something that went down, and then it starts to deteriorate because they're already angry. If you call early and start saying to them, I'd like to work together, I'd like to call periodically, I'd like to, if you have an email address, I'd like to email you sometimes about how your kid is progressing. You don't need to wait for a report card and those sorts of things. Get to know your community. That's how you get that done. That's your community just like it is those people who live there. When you go to school there, when you work in that school, that surrounding community is your community.
I promise my answer is really quick, but consider being an advocate for your kids with policymakers. Say, these are the things I see my kids experiencing, and we need to do more for them. So you can be that political voice for them as well.
Thank you. Let's give these three communities